Hi, I'm James Gardner, host of Your History, Your Story, a podcast for anyone who loves hearing fascinating tales about remarkable people, intriguing topics, and significant historical events. Our hope is to inspire you to uncover and share your history and your story. In this episode of Your History, Your Story, we're thrilled to welcome back a familiar and beloved guest, Marty Blumberg. Marty joined us previously to share stories from his books My Brooklyn, My Way and Going Back to Brooklyn. And we're excited to have him with us again to talk about his newest work, Brooklyn, the Borough of Dreams. In his latest book, Marty takes us on a poetic journey through his childhood in Brooklyn, New York during the mid-20th century. With heartfelt verse and vivid recollections, he captures the spirit of a time and place that, while long gone, still lives on in memory. A master storyteller with an extraordinary gift for detail, Marty brings to life the people, places, and events of his old neighborhood in a way that's both nostalgic and deeply human. Get ready to be transported to a simpler time where corner stores, stoop conversations, and tight-knit communities were the heart of everyday life. I'd now like to welcome Marty Blumberg back to our show. Welcome, Marty.
Hey, thanks for inviting me again, James. I do appreciate it.
Marty, you are a storyteller, and that is what this podcast is about.
Oh, yes, I have a lot of stories to tell, and I can't wait to get started.
Well, we're going to do that. Now, here's the thing. I mentioned that we're about storytelling. Your books, the first book was really the story of your younger years in Brooklyn, and then your second book, Going Back to Brooklyn, was poems, and then your third book is now really just filled with more poems. And what I really am so happy about is that you transported me through your poems to a different place and a different time. And while we're not that far apart in age, there's parts of what you talk about that I caught the fringe of. So I have certain attachments to it, but I grew up in the suburbs. You grew up in the city. I grew up in a little bit of a later time, but it gives me such a great education because I can sense, and you transported me back to that time. Could you talk about the times that you lived in? First of all, you're from Brooklyn. Can you tell us where in Brooklyn you lived? And also, what was it like growing up in that time period?
Great. I was born in 1941 and born in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And Brownsville, Brooklyn at that time was an area that was sort of segregated to different religions and different ethnic groups. My block was, I would say, 90% Jewish. And there were loads of kids. And when I say loads of kids, when I walked down my steps and took a look around, there were probably hundreds of kids, maybe 100 kids my age. That's how many families lived on my particular street.
I remember playing with kids in my neighborhood. There may have been, oh gosh, about 7 or 8 kids of close friends, close in age, and that seemed like a lot of friends, but you're talking lots of kids. So there was never really any times that you didn't know what to do with yourself.
No, there was always something to do. And basically, the kids on my street would play with kids their age. And everyone, when you walked and took a look down my street, you would see different groups, different age groups, kids playing different games, some playing on the gutter, the younger kids were on the sidewalk, but there was always something doing, and it was so active and so such a great feeling to know that there was so many friends around to keep you company and to play games with you.
So you're talking about the late 40s through the 50s and into the early 60s. That's the time period
Yes,
we're talking about?
yeah. Well, since I was born 41, early 50s, when I was about 8, 9, 10 years old, I really got to be on my own and played, with my friends, parents looking out the window, never getting involved, but watching, making sure we are safe. And we always felt safe at that time.
Here's this book coming out in just 2024. It just came out, and it's your third book, as you mentioned before. Why is it so important to you, other than thoroughly entertaining me and educating me, but why is it so important to you to capture these stories?
Well, it is very important to me. I felt, and I think anyone my age would say they had the best childhood. And I feel I had the best childhood. And I just feel, as time goes on, people forget, people pass away. And I just don't want this era to be forgotten. I'd like it to continue. I, as a grandfather, always mentioned it to my grandchildren what went on during this time, and it was a great period of time during those years.
And it's such valuable history because there's a lot of people who have great memories, but they either don't tell them, they don't share them, or they don't write them down, or both situations. I think one of my favorite Christmas shows is called Christmas Story, and the author is really the narrator talking about his childhood back in the 1940s in some Midwestern town. And I love it because it makes me think about my childhood. And when I read your books and your poems, I find myself reflecting on my childhood and some of those small moments in life, not just the big events, marriages and births of children, huge, important things, but the small things. You have an amazing memory. How do you remember all these things?
Well, James, I have a good memory for things that happened when I was younger. If you ask me what happened yesterday or what I had for dinner 2 days ago, that doesn't come to mind. But my memory as a child, I don't know, it's embedded in me. And when I went out with my four brothers and when we would go out for dinner together, it was an experience because my memories were like their memories, but they had completely different stories, but similar. They may have played with the older kids. I played with the kids my age, but we had similar memories of growing up in Brooklyn.
Now, talking about your brothers in Brooklyn, the Borough of Dreams, you dedicate this book to your brothers. Can you tell us about them?
Yes, we are a very close family. The oldest was born 1939. The youngest was born 1945. We were about 3 years apart, and we're five boys in a small apartment with my mom and dad. And being so close, we got to really connect with one another. And sadly, in the last 3 years, three of my oldest brothers passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Now it's just me and my younger brother, who's 79 years old, and I'm 83. And it's sad because all those memories that we did have are not forgotten because I wrote it down, I remember them, and I remember being with them, but not physically being with me. It's kind of sad because we had so many memories where we shared as a family.
Yeah, you had built-in playmates, but I think, as I recall from some of our earlier conversations, they also had their friends from their little bit older group, but you all you had to come around the dinner table at some time. I'm sure you did that, right?
Yeah, we did eat as a family at night, and we would talk about our different adventures, things we did, and everyone would have a chance to talk around the table, which is so much different the way it is nowadays. But we cherished those moments because my father was sitting there, my mom, they would all take an interest and listen to our stories.
You mean your parents weren't looking at their cell phones at the dinner table?
Thank God for that. We didn't have that. We had the plug-in phones, and that was enough to keep us active.
Yeah, that's one of those things I'm really thankful that we didn't have when we were kids, our cell phones and computers, even though they're wonderful in many ways. I mean, what we're doing right now is amazing. We're talking over a computer and recording this podcast, but I do think I'm thankful to God for the fact that we had to actually sit around the table and ask each other how our days were. When you get together as a family or you get together as a community, it's very important because you can start sharing and talking and finding common things and making fun. And one of those places that you mentioned about gathering is the candy store. Can you tell us about the candy store?
Yes, I could. Looking back, and I'm always thinking of when I was a young kid, what I did. And one thing that comes to mind very strongly that I never read about, I never really heard about too much. It was like a forgotten type of establishment. And that was the candy store. Now, every street in Brooklyn, the Bronx, you could take Staten Island, had a candy store. And that was the epicenter of our area. Kids would meet there after school. They would talk about the Brooklyn Dodgers. They would talk about what went on. They would talk about their stickball game that they just had. And everyone would gather there in the evening, sometimes during the day, and talk about what went on during the day. And at night, we spoke with our family about it. But during the day, it was the candy store that brought us all together.
Can you share a memory of a few items in that candy store that were particularly of interest to you?
Yes, I remember the candy store, and I know all the audiences listening today will recall what it was. Uh, let's talk about the store itself. The average candy store at that time had a long counter with round seats with plastic red or green plastic covers covering them. And usually the ones that owned this candy store were the husband and wife team. And they worked very hard. It was always open from the morning till night. And I recall many times walking in on a sizzling hot day, sitting at the counter, ordering a frap, an ice cream soda, a malted. We had pretzels on the counter that we would dip the pretzel into the malted and get that flavor. It put us into a whole different atmosphere. Sam was our owner of the store, and I would watch that Hamilton blender uh, work, make noise, spin, make malted. Our mouth used to water just watching that malted go into that glass. And it was just a terrific experience. I do recall each candy store had like little booths where people sat, and we were able to order. If we had 2 cents, we would order a 2 cent plain, which is just seltzer water. If we had a few extra nickels, we would order a Charlotte Russe. Sometimes they had that. We had all kinds of egg creams, ice cream sodas. And we would sit, and it would be an area where we could talk and relax and unwind and talk about the day's activities. Outside the candy store, James, was they had magazine racks. And what we would do is before we walked into the store, we would look at the joke books that they had. They had comic books. They had the TV guide. They had all these different books where we would thumb through it, and it would put us into a whole different area until Sam would yell out, "Hey, this is not a library. Put those books back or buy it. That's it." But just the time that we flickered through the pages and we saw what was going on, that was enough to get our imagination going. Uh, there was a jukebox. In the jukebox, for 10 cents, you could play 3 songs. And if you could imagine the background of the music by staying in that candy store with all the rock and roll songs going on, it was just a great atmosphere to be in. We had in our candy store 2 phone booths, and that was the lifeline for people that didn't have phones at home. And what they would do is give their phone number to the candy store. And our job as kids, if we heard that phone ring, we would run to get the neighbors to tell them that there's a phone. And they would give us a tip. And that was like unbelievable thing. I was fortunate. My pop, which I said in a few extra things, we had our own phone. It was a party line phone. But what I did in the candy store was this. I played a trick on a lot of people. I would take tissue paper and put it into the return mechanism of the coin slot. And what it was, when you were on the phone then, if you spoke 2 or 3 minutes, an operator would get on the phone. She would say, "Hey, I'm going to cut you off unless you put another 5 cents and 10 cents in." And people would put the money in, and it would register. And sometimes the coin would come right down and not register. And those people, they were just disconnected. And I would go later on, take the tissue paper down, have a handful of nickels and dimes. And that was the thing to do, to buy a Spalding ball. Kids used to walk into the candy store, and they just didn't buy a Spalding ball. They also had the Penzi Pinky, which was another type of pink ball. What they would do was like four kids would stand up, bounce the balls in unison, and the ball that bounced the highest, that would be the ball that they would buy. And always the Spalding, it was a nickel more than the Penzi Pinky, but they would buy that because it was a much higher bouncer. So the candy store was an area that we hung out on, we spoke about, we traded baseball cards. We loved to talk about the Brooklyn Dodgers. And that was the main topic during those times.
Yeah, and I think the candy that was there as well. One of your poems talks about some of the candies, and there's just a few of them that I remember. And one of them was the paper with the dots on it, and you used to bite this candy off it, and usually
Oh
get
yeah,
a piece of paper.
that was called like dots. It was like 100 dots on a sheet of paper, and you could never take that dot off without taking the paper off because it was like glued together. So you would eat the paper, you would chew the paper, spit it out, whatever. But it always had that flavor. But they had a lot of penny candies during that time. Bazooka gum, you were able to get that. I remember we had in front of the candy store, we had these machines. There were card machines where you could baseball cards, you put a nickel in. There was gum machines, peanut machines, charm machines where you would get a charm. It was in a little plastic capsule and open it up, you'd get a little toy. I remember putting a penny into a Chiclets bubblegum machine. I don't know if the machine was broken, but the chiclets poured down, hundreds of them, all over. It went over my, I had my hands out, it fell to the ground. I was picking it up, putting it into my pocket. It was unbelievable the amount of chiclets I got during that time.
Yeah. Also, you had mentioned about the poem about the candy cigarettes. Nothing like promoting the tobacco industry early, right?
Yeah. They had these cigarettes were sugary in taste, and kids would walk around. You would think they were smoking, but it was just a piece of candy in their mouth. There were a lot of different things that they had. Different candies were coming out. We used to have these little bottles that looked like Coke bottles. It was made out of plastic. And I don't know how healthy it was, but it was all syrup inside it, cherry syrup, lemon syrup, whatever you wanted. And all of it was like a penny or 2 cents. So this was part of our tips that we made spending in the candy store.
So, Marty, I just wanted to ask you to sort of tell us about the era that you lived in and the joys and challenges that you had in that era, you and the people born during the same time frame you were.
Well, to answer your question, James, the people that are listening that are ages 77 to 93, I just want to let them know that they belong to an incredibly rare group. And, with people dying off and everything being not remembered like it should, that's one of the reasons why I've written those three books to keep this all alive. The things that these people went through during this age from 77 to 93. Let me go through some of the stuff that they remember the milkman. Fresh milk was delivered to their door. They remember the seltzer man. They would deliver You Bet syrup with cases of seltzer up. They remember the coal truck coming down their block, peddlers singing, our moms hanging out clothes on the clothesline. The kids were jumping rope in the streets, riding their bikes. It was a simpler life, but it was centered around the basics. The imagination, our playground was the gutter. That's where we played most of our games. We would play stickball constantly. These things are all disappearing, and I feel sorry for the younger generation because they weren't able to witness what this generation went through and how they enjoyed life without the cell phones, as you mentioned, but just plain being together and playing as a group and playing with their friends.
What you just said sounds all positive. I think if some people today might look at it and think, that doesn't sound so positive. Imagine not having a dryer. You had to actually dry your clothes outside, or you had an iceman come, or you couldn't just, you had to depend on the milkman to come. What if they didn't come? Or what if you forgot the milk and it was out front turning warm and spoiling? Playing in the gutter. I mean, imagine that being something enticing for kids today to play in the gutter. So they sound like hardships, but they really were treasured memories. But although you had a wonderful childhood, there were pressures there, weren't there?
Well, there were pressures, but we never knew from being poor, being rich, money was not even a concern. And yes, we had to wait for the seltzer man to come, the milkman to come, but they came. This was their jobs. The average person, this was their job. We had grocery stores, maybe two on the street. We didn't have to travel too far. Life was very easy and life was very basic, and we were all happy, and we didn't care whether we there was no air conditioning. We would sleep on the roof. We would sleep on a fire escape. We would take a ride to the Catskill Mountains maybe one time during the summer just to cool off. But life wasn't that we had to have air conditioning. Life wasn't that we had to have a cell phone. We never had it. We never missed it. And it wasn't important to us because we didn't know what it was. What was important was family, family, being with friends, being with the brothers and sisters, and your extended family, which was the neighbors that were always looking out for you too. So it was a whole different era and it was a whole different feeling, but it was a great time.
Yeah, I think about Facebook today. And while Facebook is good in many ways, and you can stay in touch with some old friends and see what's going on. But I think a lot of the time, we're just scrolling and we're not really interacting with people. So the fact that you had so many people around you, and most of them, it sounds, were in the same economic condition. You said your dad was a mailman.
My dad was a mailman
Hmm?
and a very frugal person. He was always the first, and I mentioned this in some of my other episodes, where we were the first to have a TV, first to have a car. We were the family on the block that always had everything first. And people used to flock to our house, with the TV, with S11, with Milton Berle, with all the shows going on, the championship boxing matches. They would come with chairs and they would sit in our living room and watch these episodes. I think I remember telling you one time too that there were so many people lined up when I walked out my house one time. There was like the Milton Berle show, and we had to take chairs and leave it out in the on the gutter. And my father would move the TV right to the front window where we lived on the ground floor, and people would be cheering, sitting outside, watching the episode of Milton Berle. Uncle Milty, that was the show.
That sounds so enchanting to hear that. I remember my brother just recently, he's a little older than I am. He was saying that before we had a color TV set, we used to go down to my aunt and uncle's house, not too far from us, because they were the first ones to have a color TV. So we would go over, and it was usually a football game on a Sunday. And of course, my mother and a lot of the other people really weren't interested in football, but they liked to see the color TV set. But you mentioned something in one of your poems that there was actually this screen that you would put over a black and white TV to make it look like it was color.
Yeah, my father, in probably 1948, he bought the first TV we had. It was a 6-inch Viewtone, and it was kind of small, and it was very hard. There was only 3 channels. We used to sit by this TV and watch a pattern until the TV show went on, and he wanted the set bigger, but they didn't have bigger sets at that time. So he bought a magnifying glass that was set up for that particular TV. He put it in front of the screen. And now instead of a 6-inch TV, we had like a 10-inch TV. It was much bigger. And then there was a little slot in the magnifying glass where you could buy a piece of tint. He would buy like a red piece of tint and he would slide it down the front of the magnifying glass right in front of the screen. And now we had color. Everything was a 10-inch pinkish color TV. That to us was, no one ever had that. And years later, they had the sets. Now they have what? 60-inch, 80-inch, 90-inch TVs, color. But we didn't have it. We didn't miss it. That was fine. That was color to us.
Yeah, and when you mentioned about the candy store, and you said, I think you said TV Guide was for sale there. I remember getting that TV Guide, and it was so exciting because you could read what was on the 4 channels or 5 channels that we could get. Now there's hundreds of channels and pay services and all that stuff. But I think the television was also a way to, it was community there because as you said, a lot of people would watch it together, and there was that community feeling, even just watching TV.
Yeah, well, not that many people had TVs. Not that many people I mentioned had phones. So you're first on your block to have it. You were very popular because neighbors were open. The doors were always open. If they wanted to come in to watch a show or do anything like that, it was our pleasure to serve them, and that's the way it was.
When I was a kid, there was some cartoon on, and I forget the name of it, but the main character would be put into a situation, and you were supposed to order this, send away for this special screen that you could put over the top of it and you could draw on it, right?
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah. They had that. There was an artist that had something, art something. His name was where you were able to draw right onto your screen and copy what he had. Look, it was like tracing paper on a TV set.
yeah, the problem was is that I didn't send away for the thing, so I drew on the TV screen.
Oh boy, your mom had a long time scrubbing that off.
Yeah. So that was really, yeah, I have to ask you to share this one story about your dad. You have a poem about him in there too, but I just want a quick story. You talked about your dad being resourceful and having the first TV and being able to put that screen on with the color and all that. Being a mailman, there's often a problem with people's dogs, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. He had. I told the story a few times, and it's a very good story because I once came home from school. I was 6 years old, starved, and for some reason my mom wasn't in the house. So I looked in the pantry, and I couldn't find anything to eat. There was no food in the house. And I took a look on the top shelf, and I see cans of stuff. And I was saying, gee, this is something. I'm going to have maybe tuna fish or something. Every can said dog food. And I said, wait a second, we don't even have a dog. What do we have so much dog food? And it goes back to my dad, who, when he served on his route in Sheepshead Bay in Manhattan Beach, in the Coney Island area, the dogs in the middle of the 5, 6 in the morning, they would run after him. There were a lot of stray dogs around, and he would look in his letter bag, and he would come out with a dog food, feed the dogs, and they became his friends. So that's the reason why I had no food in the household, but there was plenty of dog food.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun. Again, there's so many poems that talk about different aspects of life growing up that are just so rich and very heartwarming. Now, you talked about this generation and the challenges that you had, but also those challenges were actually fun to you in your memories for sure. You wrote a poem in your new book. It's called It's Amazing That We Are Still Alive. Are you able to share that with us?
Yes, I will share it, but let me give you a little introduction to that. Growing up during those times, we didn't know from helmets on bikes. We didn't know from seatbelts. We didn't know from fluoride in our toothpaste. If we had a sore or we fell, mercurochrome. That was the only thing that we used. It was burning. It was, uh, but yet during this period, everyone lived through it, and we were happy, and it didn't bother us. I wrote this poem, and I'd like to read it now. Reminiscing back to our childhood days, I'm amazed how we survived in so many ways. Surviving hazards, never being concerned. With innocence as our shield, we conquered it all. These are some of the memories I do recall. Lead-laden paint on our tenement walls, asbestos insulation, unseen pitfalls. Coal-heated homes gave warmth but polluted the air. Yet we all breathed deeply, without a care. Kids didn't wear helmets when riding their bikes. Their only protection was yelling, "Yikes!" Cribs were dangerous, a hidden threat. Toys and choking hazards we'll never forget. Pediatricians said babies should sleep on their tummies. Why we listened, we had to be dummies. Cribs had dangerous strap rails, slats so wide that an infant's head could get stuck inside. Everyone smoking, not knowing the cancerous trap. Kids brought cigarettes for their parents, no questions asked. Camphor balls worn for polio prevention. Atomic bomb drills, and odd intervention. Under the desk, seeking protection in a grotesque way, but we emerged unscattered to this day. Cavities plagued our teeth, no fluoride in sight. Pesticides in the air, an unhealthy plight. Never wore seatbelts in cars as you smoked your cigars. Hand-me-down shoes cause flat feet. Ignoring calories, unhealthy foods we eat. Playgrounds were ventures full of dangers, jumping on the back of a moving vehicle knowing it could endanger. Electrical outlets, a false tempting fate, yet we emerge defying this hazardous state. Blood brotherhood, with fingers pressed so tight, chicory the lights, cavities taking flight. Ruler smacks and air pose, disciplined way, accepting then in a different way. Hitchhiking adventures, a norm it seemed. Trusting strangers, oh, how we dreamed. Sun rays embrace us, no sunscreen to guard. Peeling skin, our masterpiece regard. Bottled water wasn't a choice, garden hose for a sip. Childhood caps non-existent, a potential slip. Mercuricum, its sting and stain. Healing runes, a symbol of strength regained. Through it all, we survive. What a tale. Vintage kids resilient. Forever we prevail.
It is amazing that we are still alive, right, Marty?
Yes, with all the things we went through, it's amazing. And thank God we could talk about it today.
A couple of times I've tried to bait you into saying about the hardships that you had growing up, and each time you go back to saying, "Hey, we had a wonderful childhood. It was great," because we didn't really even realize what was going on around us. We just had a good time, and it sounds like you had to be resourceful, right? You had to deal with it. It's all we had, right?
Yeah, but it was easy to deal with it because everything was natural. We went into the streets, we made up our own games. We played games like Ringalivio, hide and seek. Uh, Girls would be playing A My Name is Alice, riding bikes. There was always something to do, always something to keep us busy. So it was never thinking of what we didn't have. It's what we had or what we made use of that really counted.
Yeah, and I think about the times in my house, we had asbestos in our basement on some pipes, and I remember swinging on those pipes. I remember, of course, everything was lead paint then. And I just remember in the neighborhood, they would bring these trucks around to spray for mosquitoes, and it used to just fog the whole neighborhood. We'd be out there playing,
Yeah,
running
yeah.
through the smog. Who knows what was in it, you know?
Well, that's what happened. The coal trucks used to come to our house. All the homes were heated with coal, and the black smoke coming out of these trucks. It was like on a sliding pond, a chute that would go right into your basement. And it was so unhealthy, but we did it and we lived through it. And thank God we could still talk about those times.
Yeah, when I drive around sometimes and you see one of those classic cars and they drive by and they're all shiny, they're probably bringing them to a show or something, but they have the old, they didn't have the anti-pollution devices in them and stuff. But you smell those classic cars and they smell awful. It's like, oh my gosh, but that's the way they all smelled then.
That's because they used leaded gas, and leaded gas would put out that smell. And it was, as a kid, I used to love that smell. I used to walk over to a car when it was starting to, but nowadays, forget about it. I don't know. My mom would never let me have done that if she knew that.
Now, one of the joys that you talk about is the joy of eating. You talk about eating at home, but that you also had a special place that you would go to once in a while called Lundy's, and you actually wrote a poem about it.
Yeah, a little bit of Lundy's. It was in Sheepshead Bay. It was a building which was a block long, 2 stories high, 2 kitchens. They had an area where it was serving 2,500 people a day. On the weekends, they would get 10 to 15,000 dinners a day. It was very popular, kind of expensive because the shore dinner was $6.95. So it wasn't a place you would go every single week. But on special occasions like birthdays, anniversaries, our family would go to Lundy's. It was on Emmons Avenue. The venue was gorgeous. It was right across the street from an area with water, with boats, fishing boats coming in. It was a beautiful area to get away from your Brooklyn street and to enjoy life looking at an ocean. And it was very, very nice in Sheepshead Bay. The poem I like to read to you is called Lundy's. And one thing about Lundy's, which I'm going to tell you in the poem too, even though it was so crowded and had so many people, they had no maitre d'. You had to wait online, and when you got in, you had to find your own seat. So here's the poem, James, and I hope your audience likes this. In Sheepshead Bay, Lundy's was the place, a seafood haven, a familiar face. The fragrance of fish, so fresh and inviting, the crowds and commotions, always exciting. Nestled by the water on Emmons Avenue, with a picturesque view of the bay, a stunning venue. Watching the fishermen selling their haul, fishtails wagging, ready to enthrall. No reservations or maitre d' to assist. Securing a seat you couldn't resist. When reaching the front of the line, you planned your attack. Looking at each table, spreading out, there was no turning back. When patrons were just about to finish, you stood by their table, waiting for them to take their last bite, then taking their seat as soon as you were able. The sure dinner, a bargain at $6.95, started with fresh biscuits, then clam chowder to start. Fresh fish, lobsters, clams, shrimp, with baked potato to relish, then blueberry pie for dessert, enough to embellish. With a full stomach and leftovers in tow, Lundy's is more than a place to go. A memory that will ever shine, a culinary gem in Brooklyn, a great place to dine. Lundy's will always be a place to recall, a symbol of great food, with fond memories for all.
Oh, that is so nice. That made me think about my family growing up. In the early years, I don't remember going out to dinner that much unless it was a special occasion. But when I was a teenager, maybe a little bit younger than a teenager, we started going out on Friday night, and we'd go to we had a place called Carrie's Charcoal Broil. And it was a real treat to go there because we could, it was a real restaurant and we could order what we want. And it was just fun. But I think of your parents bringing five boys to the restaurant. That must have been a little expensive for your parents, wasn't it?
Well, that's why we only went like once or twice a year at special occasions. Usually my mom cooked, and chicken was a big thing. Every Friday night we'd have chicken, but we kept the expenses down to save up for that Lundy's a few times a year that we went.
Yeah, so that made it extra special. I think 6.95. I think you could probably get a cup of coffee, maybe even two for that.
Without the sugar.
That is funny. So you mentioned your mom just then, and I think about your mom and I think of the five boys, hungry boys who have been playing outside in the street and stickball and all that stuff, providing you hadn't eaten too many candy bars down at the candy shop, but you came home and you were hungry. And your mom, just from previous conversations and your poem that I'm going to ask you to read in a second, really says a lot of who your mom was and just what she meant to you. So you wrote a poem called Remembering Mom. Can you tell us about that and then read it for us?
Yeah, everyone that has written to me about my books, the one thing they say is, I wish I could go back in time. I wish I could see my family again. I wish I could see my mom. I wish I could give her one more kiss. And everyone has great memories of their mothers because they were the ones that kept us together. They were the ones that they didn't go out and work, but they were home. They made sure we had food on the table. They made sure that we were healthy, had our sleep. And this poem here is called Remembering Mom. In my childhood days, oh, the tales I can tell about my mom, where sweet memories dwell. As a child, she'd read me stories of magic, of faraway lands. With a soothing voice, she'd hold my small hands. We'd go on make-believe journeys, just her and me, exploring an enchanting forest and sailing the seas. In her embrace, I felt safe from any fright as she chased away monsters that lurked in the night. Her gentle lullabies would ease me to sleep. With a beautiful voice, her sweet melody, I never had to count sheep. She baked cookies with love, the aroma filled the air. The scent of warmth and sweetness was beyond compare. Always cooking meals, I watched her prepare in the kitchen with her culinary creations, a delicious transition. On snowy days, We'll spend time together, eliminating my fears. We cuddle together, escaping all worldly cares. She read books with character, full of wonder, holding me close when we heard thunder. In the park she pushed me on the swing so high. With each joyful moment, it seems like I was a bird flying, learning to fly. She took me to stores, strolling in my carriage, down the sidewalk, smiling to neighbors stopping to talk. Her laughter echoed like music in my ears, and her smile could brighten the darkest of years. Through scraped knees and tears, she'd comfort and mend. With kisses and hugs, she'd help wounds transcend. Her unwaveringly support lifted me up when I fell. With her unconditional love, I knew I would dwell. I remember my mom, the anchor of my youth. Her presence was a blessing, a treasure of truth. Her love and stories shaped the person I become today. I'm forever grateful for my mom, who always led the way. Even though she was gone for many a year, she'll always be in my thoughts, always with a smile, sometimes with a tear.
That gets me. But Kelly and I, my wife Kelly and I, were preparing for this interview, and I was reading that poem to her, and I couldn't finish it. I actually got I got choked up from it because it made me think of my own mom, and of course, to know here so many years later, you remember all those things about her, and what a wonderful person. And when we talk about family values and what does that mean now? Uh, it's not just about going to see your kid's soccer game. It's not about just about fancy vacations or anything like that. I mean, those things are great, but there's so much about day to day life and nurturing, and not in a way that you're suffocated by your mom, but that you always feel like she's got your back and she loves you. And you mentioned about laughter. It's so important. Did you do a lot of laughing in your family?
A lot of laughing. Everyone was a comedian in the house. We we not only laughed, we sang together. We had a tape recorder. And many evenings we'd sit around the tape recorder and everyone would sing their songs. And my mom had a great voice. She used to sing. And we didn't have any instruments. All we had was an harmonica. And my brother Herb would take two spoons and we used that, hitting them together. That would be like the drums. And I would play the harmonica. Someone was banging on someone's head. Everyone was making music in the background with no music at all. But there was love. There was feeling. There was something that kept us together. My mom never had to say, I love you. I just knew she loved me, and I didn't have to tell her I loved her. She just knew it. It was a relationship we had that will never be forgotten, and it's something I'll always remember.
Yeah, and I think about the fact you have your one brother remaining. So he's the only one left who grew up the same way you did. And do the two of you talk about old times together?
Yes, we do. We talk about old times. We did a lot more talking when all five brothers were around. And I don't know if you know this one story that with my mom, we used to have family circles. And the family circle was a way of getting relatives to come to your house. And I think like once every 2 weeks or once every 3 weeks, a different family would have a family circle. And it was a time when the family, they were all walking distance. No one had to travel too far. Aunts and uncles, they would come to the house. And I got to see my cousins. So we had our cousins there. Family was very important. Not just the immediate family, but your neighbors, also uncles and aunts. And we would get together for this family circle that I wrote a poem about that too, which I'll probably like to read to you too, if you like to hear
I
it.
would love it. As a matter of fact, that was one of the ones I specifically wanted to. I said to Kelly, I got to have Marty read this one because it was so descriptive. So go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, the family circle. In the world of Jewish cuisine, my habits still remain of traditions passed down, never to complain. A journey through the 50s, a culinary delight, attending a family circle where relatives would unite. From schmaltz having to brisket, the table would groan. Indigestion, heavy sighs, the sound of a family's symphony's tone. Gribenes, kishka, flanken, and borscht, food so fine. In the tapestry of dishes, everything tasted divine. Sardines and gefilte fish were served with zest, a feast of tradition. We were truly blessed. From latkes to a knish, then served potato kugel with grace, chopped liver's rich texture. Then our relatives took a shot of schnapps to wash down the taste. But today I watch my calories with care, avoiding deep frying, a mindful affair. Sauces high in fat and sugar I evade. In the quest of health, new habits are made. It may have been unhealthy, doctors would protest, but bring me back one more family circle dinner, I surely won't contest. For in those moments, healthy concerns aside, the bonds we forge through food will forever be justified.
You know, I've heard more than once that sharing a meal together is pretty much spiritual. Like you're sharing a meal and it creates a connection with the people you're sharing a meal with. And it sounds like, you did that. I mean, you remember all those dishes. And of course, that goes into the it's amazing we're still alive category too.
Oh, that was very greasy and fried, and but like I say, give me that meal again. I wouldn't contest at all to that.
And then you could top it off by going to the candy store and buying one of those waxed bottles of soda that you bit the top off and it was like pure liquid sugar came out of them. So yeah, that is so much fun. And again, you talked about your brothers, and of course, they were a big ingredient in the dinner table at the dinner table, as well as in your life. And you have written a very, very beautiful poem about them. As the final one that you'll be sharing, could you read it to us?
Sure. In a world of five brothers, we once stood tall. Growing up in Brooklyn streets, we shared it all. But as time swept by, a sudden truth we seen. Three brothers departed to a world yet unseen. The memories we forged in our youthful prime, a treasure trove of excitement, frozen in time. But from aging's cruel hand it took its toll, leaving an empty space within my soul. Yet hope still lingers in the depths of my heart that one day we'll reunite, never again to part. For beyond this life, a new life awaits, where we'll find each other at heaven's gates. In this grand design, by a force unseen, we'll find our way back to a world pristine, with flowers in bloom and rainbows in the sky, where pollution is banished and all tears will dry. But as I ponder this miracle scheme, the present reality invades my dream. But my brother and I still remain side by side, we stand, facing life's challenges, holding each other's hand. Through laughter and tears, we find our strength in the love we share that extends to great length. To cherish what's left, to remember with care the bond we have, the moments we share. For though we may yearn for a world so divine, where all five brothers will once again shine. In the here and now, we'll make memories anew. In this imperfect world, our love will still bloom. So let us hold on to the stream so dear that in life's next chapter, our hearts will cheer. In a world where sorrow will cease to exist, we'll unite, my brothers, in eternal bliss. But until that day arrives, let's cherish the now. With my brother beside me, we'll take that bow. In the world of bittersweet, we'll find our way, and together we'll face each and every day. As we journey through life hand in hand, in the company of family we'll forever stand. Through ups and downs, come what may, in our hearts the five brothers will always stay. So let the world change only for the better, because it won't be long till we'll all stand together. But we'll always have memories without going to extremes, to a place called Brooklyn, the Borough of Dreams.
Oh, that's beautiful, Marty. What a great tribute to your brothers. And
Thank you.
man, I know that how much they meant to you. And families get into squabbles and things happen and disagreements happen and all that. And it is nice to hear that after all those years, you have these wonderful memories that you shared with them. And of course, you're still able to share with your younger brother. Really, really beautiful. And I did want to say, you and I have had a couple conversations before that your books and your stories and your poems are so important because I think it encourages people to do the same. Wouldn't you think so?
Without a doubt. In fact, one fact, my whole life growing up, my brothers, we never at one time never spoke to one another, never had a disagreement. There was so much love and so much warmth that we never heard. When I hear now that this one's not talking to that one and this sister's not talking to that sister, it makes me feel bad because I can never think of having a family where one person did not speak to the next.
It is sad. That is for sure. But your books are they're very encouraging and they're very entertaining. And the poems are just so wonderful. Now, you talk about Brooklyn and your memories of Brooklyn, and you encourage me to remember more about my family and write down more things that are more day-to-day stuff, you know. But you talk about your family, but there were also a lot of other people and some famous people and infamous people who came out of Brooklyn. Could you talk about that for a minute?
Sure, I could. Brooklyn had so many popular celebrities. So many people came out of Brooklyn. And it's amazing how this one area developed so many Pulitzer Prize winners, uh, entertainers, politicians, Ruth Ginsburg, Mel Brooks, Red Holtzman, Joe Torre, Mike Tyson, Jerry Seinfeld, Mickey Rooney, Danny Kaye, Barbara Streisand, Henry Miller. You could go on, James. It's just unbelievable the amount of people that came out of Brooklyn. And sometimes I wonder, and I say to myself, hey, there was a guy, Al Capone, that came out of Williamsburg. He was like a killer. At the age of 27, he had $100 million accumulated. He was thrown out of school when he was 14 years old for punching a teacher. And it amazes me how Brooklyn had so many different types of people, celebrities, and also Murder Incorporated that I witnessed. As a young kid, I used to go to the cinema movie on Livonia Avenue. It was amazing. There was a candy store called Midnight Rose. Upstairs was a pool room and a Chinese restaurant upstairs. And I remember getting a pickle before I went to the movies. And I stopped by the candy store to look in. And all men, Murder Incorporated, had their headquarters there. And this is where they hung out. And I couldn't believe it that I would never walk into the store. But when I got my pickle, I went into the cinema movie or the Ambassador movie, which I say to this day, how would they put up a movie theater that was under a train? I remember watching movies and all of a sudden you couldn't hear a word for like 2 minutes. The train was passing by. This is where the trains were. But the smell of the salami sandwiches, all the kids going to the movies on a Sunday rainy afternoon where they would spend 2, 3 hours watching all the newsreels, the serial movies that they had, the major features. It was cartoons. It was like a whole day at the movie. But getting back to the Murder Incorporated and getting back to celebrities, Brooklyn was a melting pot. It was an area where people came from different areas where they all did their own thing. I thank God, and I'm so happy to know that this was an era that I lived through. And the people that are listening that lived through the 50s and 60s, it's something you can never replace. It's an experience you'll have for the rest of your life. And I am so happy I lived through that era.
Thank you, Marty, so much. We are so glad we've been able to have you back 3 times. You are the ultimate storyteller and keep doing what you're doing. How can people get a copy of Brooklyn, the Borough of Dreams, and also your other 2 books, My Brooklyn, My Way, and Going Back to Brooklyn?
Yeah, well, the books are on Amazon. The 3 books that I did write was done in the last from 2020. I started to write. So in 2020, I had 1 book, 2022, the next book, and the last book was 2024 of June. They're all available on Amazon. And it's just my memories. I still will come up with other ideas and other feelings that I had that I may have forgotten about Brooklyn. Sometimes I'll be sleeping and I'll say, gee, I never wrote this in my book. And I wrote just about everything at all. And I jot it down, and hopefully I'll have enough ammunition to write another book. I have no plans right now, but one thing I'll always remember is my childhood in Brooklyn. And I'm sure your audience would feel the same way. Nothing could replace this particular time of our life.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I've always thought about, there's a lot of stress and anxiety in today's world, and there's just too much information out there. We're distracted by our phones. We're distracted by the pace of life sometimes. And I often feel that by actually leaning into our memories and actually really concentrating and remembering the things that happen can actually make us more in the present, because I think we can reflect and it feels good. And when we tell people about it, particularly family members, it's very soothing to the way we are. It makes us think back and reflect on the good things. And I think it's very important that people like you are recording experiences and memories of a past era so that today's generations can learn about what it was like. And really, I think it's a great education. I think they should offer courses in school about local history and what it was like, so people can really appreciate, the neighborhoods that they live in now, and also the people who they are involved with now, and put down their phones and try to ask each other who they are.
I agree 100%. That's why I love your show, James. Your history, your story. It gives me a chance to tell my story, where I just feel it was the greatest stories you could ever tell and the greatest times I'll ever experience. And I want to thank you and Kelly for giving me this opportunity to talk one more time.
Well, don't even say that, because if you put out anything else, we'll have you back on the show, okay?
It sounds good to me.
All right, maybe we can share a knish together sometime.
Anytime with mustard, it has to have mustard.
I love mustard. All right, Marty, have a
Take
good
care.
one. Okay.
Bye-bye. Right.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your History, Your Story. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, X, and Instagram to stay connected. We'd love to hear from you, whether you have questions, comments, or a story to share. Until next time, be well and God bless.